Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Colonnati. Today I'm going to be talking about the book releases from April, May, and June of 2020 that I am most excited for, probably squeaking this video in on the very last day of March before April actually begins. What can I say? My schedule for content has been kind of screwed up by everything going on in the world right now. And I realized that pretty much all the books I'm going to be talking about today are going to be coming out during some really difficult times. I usually rely on my library for a lot of new releases. I don't pre-order that many books, especially with my book buying budget being reduced. However, I feel like right now, circumstances being what they are, I may be pre-ordering a lot more things just because libraries are closed, indie bookstores are struggling, etc. That was kind of a weird ramble at the beginning of this, but what I'm trying to say is that if you are also excited for any books coming out in the next couple of months, try to support them. The authors really need that. There are two books on my list for April, and the first one most of you have probably heard about, and that is The Last Emperox by John Scalzi. By the way, I don't know how to pronounce this word, and it's really awkward that it's in the title of the book. Is it Emperox or Empero? If you've listened to the audiobooks, let me know, because I think I've heard some people pronounce it Empero, and I just cannot get my brain to accept that as the correct pronunciation for some reason, so I'm going with Emperox. This is the conclusion to the interdependency trilogy that began with the collapsing empire. It is about a multi-galactic space empire that starts to fall apart when the flow, the kind of like FTL flow that connects all of their planets, starts to collapse and disappear and pop up in new ways. And one of the main characters is Grayland, the new Emperox who is dealing with this at the beginning of her reign. I think that Grayland is going to be one of the primary characters in The Last Emperox. The question from the description that I included in my notes is just, will Grayland become the savior of her civilization or the last Emperox to wear the crown? I wasn't super impressed with the first book in this series, but the second one, which I have completely forgotten the title of it at the moment, really made me much more invested in the characters and their stories, and I have always really enjoyed the premise of the series overall, and now I'm really hyped up for the ending of the trilogy. I'm very interested to see exactly how Scalzi is going to wrap this up and what are going to be the answers to a lot of the questions and all this, well, collapsing going on. That was a terrible sentence. Moving on. The next book in April that I'm really looking forward to is the English translation of Vagabonds by Hao Jingfang. This is translated by Ken Liu. I have really enjoyed the short stories that I have read by Hao Jingfang, including her novelette Folding Beijing, which won a Hugo Award very deservedly. I want to say that Ken Liu has translated all of the short stories I've read by her, actually, but this is her first novel to be translated, and I kind of avoided the description of it for a long time because I frequently like to go into things like this blind without any expectations, but I actually think the description of this sounds really interesting. A century after the Martian War of Independence, a group of kids are sent to Earth as delegates from Mars, but when they return home, they are caught between the two worlds, unable to reconcile the beauty and culture of Mars with their experiences on Earth. It's a little bit different from what I thought it would be, perhaps more Mars focused, about coming back to Mars after an experience on Earth. Whereas I think I've typically read stories that are kind of the reverse, that, oh, I lived on Mars, but now here's my story on Earth, if that makes any sense. Also, I am just extremely eager to finally see a female Chinese science fiction author get a novel translated, since most of the ones that are well known by Liu Cixin are by men. We need more novels. Moving on to May, the first release that I want to mention is the new Parasolverse story. This is Defy or Defend by Gail Carriger. It's the second novella in her Delightfully Deadly series, which I believe is kind of follow-up stories about what happens to Sophronia's schoolmates from the finishing school. The first one was Poison or Protect, and it was about Prussia, and Defy or Defend is about Dimity. And all these characters, Sophronia and her friends, are like intelligencers, spies, undercover agents, basically, in steampunk historical fantasy world, basically. It's a lot of fun. So the little bit of the description I saved for this is a vampire hive descending into madness, a beautiful spy with a sparkly plan, and the bodyguard who must keep them from killing each other. I bet it is going to be a fun romp with a little bit of romance, just as I usually expect from Carriger. The next book coming out in May that I'm looking forward to is a sequel, and that is Driving the Deep by Suzanne Palmer. This is the follow-up to her debut novel, Finder, which I thought was some really good space adventures, especially on audiobook. And it is about like a space repo man named Fergus Ferguson. I have a feeling that after all of these setup adventures in the first book, I'm going to enjoy Driving the Deep even more. This book has a very long description that I think gives far too much away, so suffice it to say that it seems to involve Fergus facing his past, going back to Earth, and somebody stole his motorcycle, which he didn't even own in the first place. I detect possible character development. Next up in May is one of my top 2 most anticipated books of the entire year. Can you guess what the other one is? This one is Network Effect by Martha Wells. It's the next Murderbot story. Need I say anything else? I mean, I love Murderbot. I've reread the first 4 novellas. I'm ready for more, and I'm so excited for a full-length novel. Also, I love the summary for this one. I just had to read it to you. You know that feeling when you're at work and you've had enough of people, and then the boss walks in with yet another job that needs to be done right this second, or the world will end, but all you want to do is go home and binge your favorite shows? And you're a sentient murder machine programmed for destruction? Congratulations, you're Murderbot. Come for the pew-pew space battles, stay for the most relatable AI you'll read this century. I love everything about this, and I've had it pre-ordered for months. And then there are not 1, but 2 releases coming out from Adrian Tchaikovsky at the end of May. I forgot to double check if the dates for both of these were US or possibly UK. I'm not really sure, but I'll get my hands on both of them one way or another. The first one is The Doors of Eden, and this seems to be a new full-length standalone science fiction novel from Tchaikovsky, which sounds like my thing completely. So here's a little bit of the description. Lee's best friend went missing on Bodmin Moor 4 years ago. She and Mal were chasing rumors of monsters when they found something all too real. Now Mal is back, but where has she been and who is she working for? When government physicist K. Amal Khan is attacked, the security services investigate. Khan's extra-dimensional research was purely theoretical until she found cracks between our world and countless others. Parallel Earths where monsters live. These cracks are getting wider every day, so who knows what might creep through, or what will happen when those walls finally come crashing down. Now, is it just me, or does that sound a little bit like Stranger Things, or maybe a little bit like that episode of Doctor Who that I can barely remember? Anyway, I am interested. I will definitely be checking this one out. And then the other release by Tchaikovsky in May is a novella coming out from Solaris called Firewalkers, which seems to be about kids who repair solar panels in the deserts on Earth, and the Earth is burning up, basically. So I'm curious what the actual story is here. I'm hoping it's adult science fiction and not young adult. It's a bit difficult to tell from the description, but I am intrigued. And now moving on to June. I think I speak for all of us when I say we are all waiting for Katherine Addison's follow-up to The Goblin Emperor. This next book is not that book, unfortunately, but it is a new release from Addison, and that is The Angel of Crows. And the description begins with, "This is not the story you think it is." You're right. I was expecting more Emperor Maya. These are not the characters you think they are. This is not the book you are expecting. In an alternate 1880s London, angels inhabit every public building, and vampires and werewolves walk the streets with human beings under a well-regulated truce. A fantastic utopia except for a few things. Angels can fall, and that fall is like a nuclear bomb in both the physical and metaphysical worlds. And human beings remain human with all their kindness and greed and passions and a murderous intent. Jack the Ripper stalks the streets of this London too, but this London has an angel, the Angel of the Crows. To be clear, I'm not usually interested in anything that includes Jack the Ripper because that's just not really my thing. It's too much for me. And this does also sound a tiny bit like that fantasy Paris with Angels series by Alias de Bodard that I actually really didn't like. But I am incredibly curious as to what Addison is doing with this. I'm going to read it to find out and for something to tide me over until we get that sequel to The Goblin Emperor. I think I have to say at this point that Silvia Moreno-Garcia is one of my favorite new-to-me authors. I have enjoyed everything I have read by her so far, and especially her last novel, Gods of Jade and Shadow, which I loved. And after reading that book, I realized I'm going to have to get everything she ever comes out with now. So her next book coming out in May is Mexican Gothic, which is tagged as a bunch of things on Goodreads: Gothic, horror, historical fiction, fantasy, etc. I do want to go into this one relatively blind, so I'm avoiding any super specific descriptions of it, but it is described as a reimagining of the classic Gothic suspense novel, a story about an isolated mansion in 1950s Mexico and the brave socialite drawn to its treacherous secrets. I don't know, that's giving me slight Rebecca vibes, so sign me up. I'm very interested in this. Have I been saying May? I meant June. Mexican Gothic and The Angel of Crows are coming out in June, not in May. Where is my mind right now? The next book coming out in June that I am really looking forward to is the new fantasy novel from Yoon Lee called Phoenix Extravagant. For generations, the Empire has spread across the world, nigh unstoppable in their advance. Its power depends on its automata, magically animated and programmed with sigils and patterns painted in mystical pigments. A symbol painter, themselves a colonial subject, is frustrated in their work when their supply of Phoenix Extravagant dries up and sets out to find the source. What they'll discover is darker than anything they could have imagined. What I'm getting from this is art, symbols, magical pigments, that's a new one, a non-binary character and a quest, and because it is Yoon Lee, I'm expecting some fantastic world building, and yeah, I will read anything that Yoon Lee puts out now. I don't usually include comics in my anticipated releases list because there are so many of them, the trade volumes can come out pretty quickly, but I wanted to mention Giant Days of Volume 13. This is written by John Allison and the artwork is by Mack Sarin. This is the conclusion to the Giant Days series, which is a contemporary comic about a group of friends at university in England, and I have loved every moment of this comic. I am sad it is coming to an end at the same time that I'm happy to finally get an actual end to a story that I love. You probably heard me say this before, but I really prefer series, and especially like comic series, that have a planned end and don't get dragged out unnecessarily. I want it to have a satisfying conclusion more than I want more and more and more volumes. So I'm very happy that Giant Days is probably going to end on an extremely solid note, and I will then go on to read whatever John Allison does next. But yes, if you haven't already checked out this comic, and you want something very funny and enjoyable and probably very relatable if you went to university, I can highly recommend Giant Days. And lastly for this list, I am very much looking forward to a nonfiction book called The End of Everything, Astrophysically Speaking by Katie Mack. I have followed Mack on Twitter for a couple of years and I thought I should really pick up her first book. I enjoy reading about physics and astronomy and all that fun stuff, and you know, right now, why not read about the end of the universe? So this book is described as an accessible and eye-opening look at the 5 different ways the universe could end and the mind-blowing lessons each scenario reveals about the most important concepts in physics. And yeah, I know I'm going to enjoy reading about this one. I am usually on the lookout for nonfiction books about science that are written by women who are actually experts in their field rather than just journalists. And this is exactly the kind of book I've been looking for. Katie Mack is definitely a physicist, astrophysicist. So yes, definitely going to check this one out. And that is it. Those are all of my most anticipated books for April, May, and June. There are, of course, always others that I will eventually get around to reading, but these are the ones I will try to get one way or another over the coming months. Do let me know if you are also looking forward to any of these. Do they sound good to you? Is there anything that you are really looking forward to that I didn't mention? Leave me a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with another video soon, and until then, bye.